Now, those who are routinely a part of our church know that if I bring a chair up here, they sort of go, uh-oh. And the reason is that means we're going to be reading a lot of Scripture. And you know what? I don't think we do enough of that in church. So today, go like this, everybody. Okay? We're only going to be in 2 books, so at least we'll make it easy. Make it even easier, they both have the name John. How's that? The Gospel of John and 1 John. But we're going to look at quite a bit of Scripture today. I'd really like God's Spirit to speak through His Word today to us. And so just to be prepared for that. Let me start by welcoming you. If you've not been here before, we're so glad you're here. I want you to feel most welcome. If you are visiting us and live here locally, we'd love to get to know you better and share with you what God's doing here, and also learn how we can best serve you. Today we're going to talk about a message that's titled a little funny. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And you said, I thought you were going to be teaching from the Bible. Well, you might know in your mind already where that comes from. But we're going to be looking at the Gospel of John, and you can turn, if you'd like, to John chapter 13, where we're in this series now called Experiencing the Life, and we are learning together how to experience the abundant life that God makes possible through the gospel, through Jesus Christ. We have been one set of 6 weeks in learning how to believe the things Jesus believed. And of course, folks, that matters. Is there such a thing as truth? Is it a constant or is it relative? Where do we find it? What are the things that Jesus taught that we can sink our feet into, that we can be firmly planted in? And then we spent 6 more weeks looking at how to live like Jesus. We don't want to just know the things Jesus knows. We want to live the way He lived and literally put into practice the way He lived. And now today, for the next 6 weeks, we begin the third of these 5 series. And this one is loving like Jesus. Love like Jesus. So what we understand is this. When God's agape kind of love literally permeates our minds and our hearts and our lives and the lives of His children, then every single relationship that we encounter, every relationship, I believe, can and will be impacted. And it will be transformed. And that we'll be able to use God's love to impact the world for the advancement of His kingdom. Love is a significant subject in the Scriptures, is it not? Now, many of you might have actually went to school where they taught history. These days, I think they're reteaching history, kind of changing it. But we used to learn something about the Declaration of Independence if you grew up in the United States of America. And in Congress, in July 4th, remember the date? 1776. There was a unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. That's what was published on the Declaration of Independence. And it says this: when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, of course that was these colonies with England, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to such separation. And then we had something called the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, and it says this: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are, as you remember, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, the patriots of the American Revolution went on to articulate then, if you've ever read this, 26 particular grievances that they had against King George and the British government. And this became, as you know, a world-changing document. And knowing that their personal positions, their possessions, even their lives would be at risk, the fathers of this great country were willing to sacrifice everything because of their faith that there was a God and that He had sense of right and wrong, and their dream of a free land that would be governed by the principles of Holy Scripture. 56 men signed the Declaration of Independence. Largest and at the top center of the document was the name of John Hancock. That's why we say, would you put your John Hancock here? Because his was big and bold, right? He was the president at the time of the Second Continental Congress. Mr. Hancock was a merchant and businessman and was at that time one of the wealthiest men in the 13 colonies. Other notable signatures on that document included John and Samuel Adams, Robert Paine, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, to name a few. But many of these men lost everything in the war that would follow. Their personal losses became the world's great gain. And I'm afraid, I hate to admit, that we perhaps have forgotten some of the price that was paid. 5 of these signers were captured by British and treated as traitors and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their own sons in the Revolutionary Army, and another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 died from wounds or hardship of the Revolutionary War. What kind of men were these? 24 were lawyers and jurists. 11 were merchants. 9 were farmers and large plantation owners. Some were men of means and well-educated, not all. But they signed the Declaration of Independence knowing full well that the penalty would be certain death if they were captured. Carter Braxton of Virginia was a wealthy planter and trader, saw his ships swept from the seas by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay for his debts and died in rags. Thomas McKean was so hounded by the British that he was forced to move his family almost constantly. He served in the Congress without pay, and his family was kept in hiding. His possessions were taken away from him, and he ended up impoverished. Vandals and soldiers or both looted the properties of William Ellery, George Clymer, Lyman Hall, George Walton, Button Gwinnett, Thomas Hayward, Edward Rutledge, and Arthur Middleton. I thought I'd put those names in there because we never hear those guys, right? And at the Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. noted that the British General Cornwallis had selected his house for his headquarters, and he urged George Washington to literally bomb that house and destroyed it. It was his own house. He died bankrupt. Francis Lewis had his home and properties destroyed. The British jailed his wife, who then within a few months died. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and his mill were laid waste. For more than a year, he had to live in hiding in the forests, in the woods, in caves, and he returned home to find his wife dead and his children vanished. He, of course, later died of exhaustion as well. Lewis Morris and Phyllis Livingston also suffered similar fates. Friends, it's been 243 years this July since these brave men put their signatures on a very valuable parchment. And for all that time, this country has remained free largely because of its foundation on certain self-evident truths. Those truths were set in motion by the Lord God. But it's been nearly 1,750 years before that Continental Congress, before they gathered in Philadelphia, by the way, the city of brotherly love. 1,750 years before that, another group of men also met in Jerusalem. And they met in the upstairs, in an upper room, to celebrate the Jewish festival of Passover. Present with Jesus were an uncelebrated group of outcasts, fishermen, tax collectors, and religious zealots. And like the signers of the Declaration of Independence, these men would put their hopes, their dreams, their personal welfare, their very lives on the line for truths that night they would discover were also self-evident. This group of 11 men would learn from the master, the teacher, about a new kind of eternal life, about a way of establishing and remaining connected with God Himself. They would be introduced to a grand conspiracy which is shrouded in mystery, that had at its source the cosmic plan of the triune God of all creation. And you and I can read about the charters of the freedom of the United States in the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights. All we have to do is go and visit the National Archive Museum in Washington, D.C. But more importantly this morning, we can read about the charter of the Church of Jesus Christ simply by turning right here in our Bibles to the Gospel of John in chapter 13. Will you join me there? John chapter 13. And we pick up in verse 31. John 13, 31. And when he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and glorify him at once. Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another." You know, the men who followed Jesus from Galilee down to Jerusalem had made a choice. And it was a choice to become apprentices, to apprentice themselves to Jesus. And they forsook their past. And they left their lives behind. And they began an adventure of a lifetime with Jesus. You recall that they had seen many wonderful things along the way. They saw incredible miracles that stretched their faith. They heard wonderful things, stories about life in the kingdom of God that expanded their understanding of what was really real. And now here they had reached their destination. They had arrived in Jerusalem with fanfare and jubilation. Remember, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And the whole city had turned out to see them arrive. And they were eagerly preparing for their master to expel the Romans and reestablish the monarchy there in Jerusalem. But Jesus wasn't doing anything the way they expected. He wrapped himself in a towel. And playing the role of a household servant, he literally washed their feet. You remember? This, he said, was an example for the way that they should serve one another. He then proclaimed that there was a traitor in their midst, one who would betray Jesus to the enemy. And I'm sure they were looking at each other, okay, who is it? Some of them were even wondering if it would be them. And now, in what would surely be his most shining moment, he struck them deeply with fear in their hearts. He said, "I won't be with you much longer." Even worse, he suggested that he was going somewhere that they would not be able to follow. And then he gave them a most unusual instruction, a new commandment, he called it. Did you see it there? To love one another just as he had loved them. Now, these were Jewish men. They grew up in the Jewish homes as boys, and they had memorized Deuteronomy 6:5 when they were just boys. Love the Lord your God with all your, what? Heart, soul, mind, and strength. They knew the instructions of Moses, who said, "You shall love the Lord your God and always keep his charge, his statutes, his ordinance, his commandments." But Jesus was clearly saying something different to them. He was setting a new standard of measurement, one by which they would be observed and defined. And keeping this commandment would determine their worth, their value as an apprentice, a disciple of Jesus. In the conversation that follows these statements from Jesus, Jesus shared some of the most intimate and some of the most soul-stirring words that they had ever heard. He lifts their spirits while at the same time kind of crushing some of their dreams. He painted a picture of a new world where the kingdom of God moved mysteriously among the kingdoms of this world. And he spoke of a coming sorrow that would be replaced by joy. And then he prayed for them. And what a prayer it was. He even invited them to pray to the Father with the same simplicity and familiarity with which he prayed. Something they could never have imagined. And underlying all of this was a great theme, the triumph of love. That word is used so many times, it's lodged deeply into the Apostle John's memory. And so when he writes his gospel, we're reading from here, and he describes this scene, he literally uses the word agape, love, 25 times. Later in his life, as an old man in Ephesus, he would write 3 letters. We call them the epistles, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And in those letters, he would summarize this conversation that took place in that upper room, and he would use the word love 37 more times. No wonder he became known as the apostle of love. We find other tremendous themes mirrored both in John's gospel and in his first epistle. Paramount subjects like, well, what is eternal life? Is that important to know? Who really possesses it? How do you know if they have it? What's the importance of abiding in Christ? How do we learn to literally live like Jesus, to walk in the light, he said? How do we overcome sin? What's the presence and purpose and power of the Holy Spirit? These themes weave throughout the text we're going to read. Now, I want you to turn with me over a page, and we're just going to read God's Word. I want you to hear what it has to say. I believe the Holy Spirit will move our hearts today. Start with me in chapter 14 and verse 1. By the way, if you don't have a Bible, there should be one right there by you, or just scooch over next to a neighbor who's got one. They'll share with you, right? Right? You'll share? Okay. John chapter 14, verse 1. Jesus says, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may also be. And you know the way to where I'm going." Well, Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way?" And Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him." Philip said to him, "Lord, show us the Father, and it will be enough for us." And Jesus said to him, "Have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, or else believe on account of the works themselves. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do. And greater works than these will he do, because I'm going to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. If you love me," and I want you from here on out, if you have a pen in your own Bible, underline the word love. "If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever, even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. You will know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Yet a little while, and the world will see me no more, but you will see me, because I live. You also will live. In that day you will know that I am in the Father, and you in me, and I in you. Whosoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him." Judas, not Iscariot, there were 2 Judases, said to him, "Lord, how is it that you will manifest yourself to us and not to the world?" Jesus answered him, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words, and the word that you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me. These things I have spoken to you while I am still with you. But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I have said to you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. You heard me say to you, I am going away and will come to you. If you loved me, you would have rejoiced, because I'm going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. And now I have told you before it takes place, so that when it does take place, you will believe. I will no longer talk much with you, for the ruler of this world is coming, and he has no claim on me, but I do as the Father has commanded me, so that the world may know that I love the Father. And then he said, Rise, let us go from here. Now, you'll notice that this conversation is taking place. Judas, the betrayer, has already left. And now they're going to go out of this upper room, and they're going to go down through the streets of Jerusalem. They're going to go down out the gate, down across the Kidron Valley, and they're going to walk through a vineyard. And so in chapter 15, verse 1, it says, Jesus is saying, as they're walking through this vineyard, I am the true vine. My Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you my friends. For all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you love one another. Now, for many of you, that might be the most extensive passage of Scripture you've read this year. If so, I encourage you to start reading the Bible more, all right? What we see here are some tremendous themes. What does it mean to be a disciple? Jesus is taking the time here before his betrayal, before his crucifixion. And you think about it. From this point on, things go really fast, don't they? They go out into the garden there, and Jesus is praying, and then the betrayer, Judas, comes with the soldiers, and Jesus is arrested and taken to false trial, and then, of course, crucified. And let me tell you, these guys' hopes and dreams are just shattered as all of this transpires quickly. And then he's dead. And they put him in a tomb. And they're gathered in fear, wondering what's going to become of them, wondering if they're going to be chased down and hunted and killed likewise because they were, quote unquote, causing a insurrection. Okay? And then news comes to them. Jesus is alive. What a roller coaster of emotions. Can you imagine? But Jesus is taking the time here to share with them some of the most powerful and significant things he ever shared with those closest to him. Turn over another page. Turn to chapter 17 and verse 20. He's going to teach them about prayer. Now, by the way, this is the real Lord's Prayer right here. The one we learn as the Lord's Prayer is a model prayer for us how to pray. But this is him praying. Notice in verse 20. He says, I don't ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word. Friends, you ought to underline that in your Bible. Who is that? You and I. all these 17 or 2,000 years later, we're the ones who have believed through the word of these people, right? In Jesus Christ. Jesus is praying for you, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, and are in me, and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given to me, I have given to them, that they may be one, even as we are one. I and them, and you and me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me, and love them even as you loved me. Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am, to see my glory that you have given me because you loved me before the foundation of the world. O righteous Father, even though the world does not know you, I know you, and these, he's talking to the disciples, know you, that you have sent me. And I made known to them your name, and will continue to make it known, that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. And that ends John's, in his gospel, story of this incredible time with Jesus in the upper room and right before his betrayal. But he also writes a couple of letters when he is an older pastor in Ephesus. And by the way, church tradition says they tried to kill him. They boiled him in oil, but he survived. And we find those writings in 1 John, near the end of the Bible, if you don't mind turning with me there. 1 John, notice chapter 1. I don't know about you, but John's one of my favorite books. I love to read the Gospel of John and 1 John. 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. Most of the other Gospels starts with Bethlehem. John starts with who is it, right? With Jesus. He does the same in the letter here. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we looked upon and have touched with our hands, concerning the word of life. The life was made manifest, and we have seen it, and testified to it, and proclaimed to you the eternal life, which was with the Father, and was manifest to us. That which we have seen and heard, we proclaim also to you, so that you too may have fellowship with us. And indeed, our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. And we're writing these things so that our joy may be complete. This is the message we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness. If we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. If we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us. My little children, I'm writing these things to you so that you may not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. He is the propitiation or satisfaction for our sins, not for ours only, but for the sins of the whole world. And by this we know that we have come to know him, if we keep his commandments. Whoever says, I know him, but does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, in him truly the love of God is perfected. By this we may know that we are in him. Whoever says he abides in him ought to walk in the same way in which he walked. Beloved, I'm writing to you no new commandment, but an old commandment that you had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word that you have heard. At the same time, it is a new commandment that I'm writing to you, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. Whoever says he's in the light and hates his brother is still in the darkness. Whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and in him there is no cause for stumbling. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and does not know where he's going, because the darkness has blinded his eyes. Turn the page. Look at chapter 2, just a few verses, verse 15 through 17. You're familiar with them. He says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, and the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires. But whoever does the will of God abides forever. You'll see down in verse 28, he says, little children, abide in him, so that when he appears we may have confidence and not shrink from him in shame at his coming. If you know that he is righteous, you may be sure that everyone who practices righteousness has been born of him. See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called the children of God, and so we are. Friends, you could go on and read, if you look at chapter 4, I won't read the whole thing to you, but 37 more times Jesus talks about what love is. How do we know it? How we practice it? What this commandment is that John is sharing from Jesus. This is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he has commanded us. And he goes on to reiterate this in great detail in chapters 4 and 5. And it shows, he says many times, this is proof that we are what? Abiding in him. We are connected to him. The reality of his life is in us. The Holy Spirit at work changing us to live like him. This series that we're going to be spending the next 6 weeks on is about loving like Jesus. He said what? A great commandment I'm giving to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. And so this agape kind of love is a prime indicator that the Holy Spirit is at work in our spiritual formation. We all have a spiritual formation. It's like an education. We all have one. It's just what kind of one do we have? And he's at work changing the inside of us to look like the inside of Jesus and his character. John chapter 4, verse 8 makes that very, very clear. Verse 7, beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. But listen to verse 8. Anyone who does not love God does not know God, because what? God is love. It's a clear and simple statement. God is love. Everything that God does, he does in love because it's one of his immutable attributes. And if we want to live like Jesus, what we spent the last 6 weeks on, we're going to have to learn to live in a manner that naturally and routinely and consistently lives out and reflects his love. When agape love permeates every aspect of our lives, trust me, it will transform every relationship we have. What does love look like? You know, we live in a greedy, busy, comfort-seeking, materialistic world. And it's no surprise then that people don't really know what love looks like. Elsewhere we find that Scripture says a terrible time, dangerous and evil time is coming, and people will be what? Lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. We overuse and abuse that word, love, don't we? We connect it to everything from our favorite sports team to chocolate, from apple pies to Chevrolets. But without the Holy Spirit moving in our hearts and the transforming Word of God, we really have no hope of imitating Christ in the manner of love that he had. But as we read his Word, and when we abide in him, and when we seek his kingdom first, and when his Word abides in us, and when we walk by means of the Holy Spirit, then we can be assured that his love can and does and will move us to both think and act with agape, godlike love. I recently came across an advertisement for a book by Shauna Pilgrim. I haven't bought it. I'm going to. Entitled, Love Where You Live. Love Where You Live. Now, what a great title. I mean, what if we truly loved where we live? Now, some of y'all who might be visiting say, well, that's hard, not too hard for y'all. You live here on Maui, right? But I'm not talking about perfect weather and beautiful beaches and mountains and jungles and ocean. What if we were really allowed the Holy Spirit to guide us into the kind of love and to fuel us in loving people right around us? Those who are near to us, or as the Old English put, nigh to us, our neighbors. Did you know that's where the word neighbor comes from? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor, those near to you, as yourself, right? What if we could bring His love to bear in every thought, in every plan, in every action, every day? Surely this would demonstrate the monumental transformation that God is undertaking inside of us. And it would go a long way, I think, to transforming how we treat one another right here in the body of Christ. You know, that idea of loving one another, that phrase, loving one another, is repeated 14 times in the New Testament. And something repeated that often ought not be missed, right? If we personally are being permeated by God's love and our church right here is saturated with it, then can we not expect that it will have Jesus' desired effect of impacting the world around us? Wouldn't all men know that we have come to be His apprentices, His disciples, by the manner in which we bring His love to bear right here in the body of Christ? Real love, agape love, is about people, friends. It's about relationships. And real love, agape love, impacts every relationship. And so this next 6 weeks, we're going to be focusing deeply and specifically on God's love in the messages we have here together in the worship center, in your small groups, in your daily devotions. But let's do something very important right here from the start. I want to define agape love, okay? Love as it's used here in the Bible is more than a feeling, though it certainly will affect our feelings. It's more than some pleasurable sensation we experience romantically. The Bible has another word for that. God's agape love flows in action. As you read this morning and you study this, you'll find that it's specifically a sacrificial kind of action led by God's Spirit without the need or desire for recompense or recognition or reward. The main idea of this kind of love is that it moves us in thought and in action that seeks to promote God's very best for the person being loved, to want for them what God wants for them, what is best for them. And we can ask ourselves, what does agape kind of love look like? And we can ask that in every situation we face this week. If we have, as we started out in the first 6 weeks, begun to believe the way Jesus believed, and in the next 6 weeks began to train ourselves by His grace to live the way He lives, then we can be confident that His transforming power within us, we will be thoroughly equipped to actually love the people around us. We can bring the grace and the peace and the joy and the hope and the love of Jesus to the here and now. And if we don't, then what? It won't do us much good to have all the tools of the Christian life but lack the love of God as our primary motivation. We won't do the things Jesus expects us just because we know some Bible stuff. That has been the failure of religion for 100 years. It's going to come down to relationships, friends, right? We will interact in love to the people we meet, the people we know, and the people we interact with every day. And sometimes, those might be the toughest people to love. And this is one area where we as the church must be completely separate and distinct from the world. The world teaches about love, but it's easy to love the person that loves you back. You know, we've already been warned about the world's kind of love, haven't we? But we're pilgrims on a journey through a world as citizens of a heavenly kingdom, and our desire must be on the world that is ahead of us, not on the one that is passing away. And that means we have to ask ourselves, who and what do I really love? And then we can begin to wrestle with the question, how to love people the way God loves them. You all get a bulletin or a worship folder on the way in? How many of you have ever actually looked at it other than the cover? Oh, come on. Man, let's go back to that part about lying and sin. You didn't look at it, did you? You looked at the outside. Inside it, at the bottom, on the right-hand side, the little logo there. Every week in our bulletin, you find our twofold purpose here at KBC. I think you have it behind me, right? We exist to accurately reveal, excuse me, to accurately reveal the glory and love of God to the world and to help every believer become a fully committed follower of Jesus Christ. Our church logo and motto summarizes this goal with the words, loving God, loving people, following Christ, following Jesus. And that's what we're doing here today. We're attempting to fill the great commandment to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love people. We're attempting to fulfill the great commission of making disciples, followers of the way of Jesus. And friends, if we want to experience this abundant life that God came to give us, that Christ came to make possible for us, then we're going to have to learn and apply these lessons, the lessons we're going to learn this series. There can be nothing but empty religion in a church that doesn't know and understand and live agape love, right? And what if today, right now, Sunday, May 19th, 2019, was recorded in history as a day this group of men and women right here affixed their signatures to a world-changing document. Let's call it the Declaration of Divine Dependence. And you're going to sign your John Hancock there, big and bold. And what if you knew that signing that document would place your reputation and your positions and your resources, your very family, even your life at risk? And what if you signed it anyway? Because you'd become overwhelmed by God's agape love and you saw on the horizon a new and better kingdom coming. And what if we were eager to allow Him to radically transform us in any way He wishes into the image of His Son? And what if together, this group of kingdom citizens who are aliens and strangers in a foreign land would bring about a new revolution? Don't get me wrong, friends. This is a loving church. I've been a part of it now for 18 years. And I've seen God's love sacrificially demonstrated many, many, many times. But that said, I think we can do a little better. I believe if we allow God's love to permeate our lives, then that love will become self-evident. And others will see that you are a disciple, a follower of Jesus Christ. For that reason, I'm excited about what we're going to experience together, what we're going to be sharing and learning together in this next series. I want to remind you of some things today. Pick up your devotional material if you haven't already. Your small group materials are available for you today back here. I want to remind you to pray for one another. That each and every morning as you wake up and you study God's Word and as you allow the Holy Spirit to lay out your day, that you are constantly throughout the day asking the question, what does love look like in this situation? Lord, how do I demonstrate that love? I'd also like to remind you, we got a lot coming up this summer. Both of those camps for children and youth, you heard some about that. I'd like for you to make a focus, would you, this week? Deliberately focus on loving somebody that you have previously found to be very difficult to love. How many of you got somebody like that in your life? And by the way, if you're raising your hand while looking across the room, that might tell us something here, but all right. Deliberately focus on that. It'll take sacrifice, won't it? It will take surrender to the will of God. You might be surprised about what God will do on the inside of you. I want you to remember that you're not doing this on your own. You are part of a biblical community where this kind of discipleship takes place. You're part of the extended family of God in which His Holy Spirit is moving in this world. You have the Word of God. Just open it and read it. Maybe you can reread what we just read today. And you have the resources of God's grace to draw upon each and every day. Friends, I believe if we do that, this church will truly be the kind of church with open arms, open hearts, open doors, a place where God's love can freely flow. Now, before we end with a benediction here,